From his strange obsessive behavior to his unsettling calmness in the face of extreme violence, Nigel Albright is one of those characters who keeps you guessing about his true nature. But what if his creepy demeanor isn't just part of his villainous charm? What if it's a symptom of something much darker? Something that lurks just below the surface. Something that goes far beyond what we see in the typical comic book villain. When Nigel violently decapitates Charlie and leaves his severed and sawed-in-half head in the middle of Sam's store, it's impossible to ignore the chilling implications of his actions. Why does Nigel seem to delight in his disturbing crimes? And what drives him to go so far to impress someone like Sam? Is he just a sociopath? Or could his behavior point to deeper psychological disorders? Today we're diving into Nigel's twisted mind, analyzing his behavior through the lens of the DSM-5, and uncovering the potential diagnoses that could explain his violent tendencies, narcissism, and even his obsession with stalking. We're going to break down his actions, his personality, and his terrifying habits through this psychological lens. So what types of psychosis might Nigel be suffering from? Stay tuned to find out. I believe that Nigel suffers from antisocial personality disorder with sociopathic tendencies. To be diagnosed with ASPD, a person must meet 3 or more of the following 7 criteria since the age of 15, along with evidence of conduct disorder before age 15, and the individual must be at least 18 years old. This criteria includes failure to conform to social norms concerning lawful behaviors, deceitfulness, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead, irritability or aggressiveness, reckless disregard for safety of self or others, consistent irresponsibility, and a lack of remorse. Of course, Nigel exhibits all 7 of these behaviors. He's an extreme case. However, along with these, Nigel also exhibits emotional volatility because he is far more emotionally erratic than someone like Sam. His rage and obsessive need to be acknowledged are classic sociopathic traits. He also has a lack of long-term planning, as he improvises his crimes in public settings, making him more impulsive and emotionally driven. Nigel also has a need for connection. Unlike many psychopaths who are emotionally cold, Nigel craves recognition and connection, and has his whole life, from the groups who have shunned him in college, and from Sam especially. He also has limited emotional control. His public outbursts and quick descent into revenge tactics are characteristic of sociopaths, not cold, calculating psychopaths. Now that I've laid out the basics of Nigel's diagnosis, let's take a look at each in detail. So what specifics from beneath the trees where nobody sees confirm Nigel's ASPD? Well, Nigel presents an overwhelming number of symptoms consistent with antisocial personality disorder, as outlined in the DSM-5, and his behavior distinctly aligns with classic markers for sociopathy. At the most basic level, Nigel demonstrates a pervasive disregard for social norms and lawful behavior. He murders multiple individuals throughout this series, each in increasingly violent and public displays. His first known victim, Martin the Goat, is strung up on a parade float for the entire town to see. His second victim, Cherry Gherkins, is stalked, mutilated, and disemboweled before her remains are staged in the lobby of Woodbrook Elementary School. His third victim, Charlie, is decapitated with a table saw inside Sam's store, leaving the scene soaked in blood. These acts alone display a blatant rejection of societal rules and a willingness to put others at immense risk without remorse and without empathy. Deceit and manipulation are also central to Nigel's psychological makeup. He maintains a carefully concealed double life, living quietly with his mother while secretly operating a dark room in a separate apartment and stalking both his victims and Sam. He has been observing Sam for over a year, recording her kills, documenting her movements, and attempting to mirror her behaviors to earn her attention. Nigel's motivation is not purely sadistic, but also deeply rooted in a need for recognition and connection, hallmarks of sociopathy. He is impulsive, erratic, and emotionally reactive. His crimes are not methodically planned. Instead, they are staged for maximum shock value. He kills Charlie right in Sam's own store, makes no attempt to clean up, and even calls the police on Sam after framing her with the buried paint cans of her previous victims he planted in the store. These reckless and impulsive decisions expose his inability to think through consequences, a core trait of sociopathic behavior. Nigel also exhibits severe emotional dysregulation. When Sam finally rejects him, he flies into a rage, smashes a porcelain tea set, and immediately begins plotting revenge. This moment of narcissistic injury transforms him from admirer to vindictive threat. His behavior is aggressive and escalating. It is only after Sam rejects him that he murders Charlie, one of Sam's employees. He also attempts to abduct a child from a park, stalks a young barista, and covertly photographs her as he follows her around town, mirroring his pattern of behavior with previous victims. His overconfidence is also notable. Nigel genuinely believes he can outsmart Sam, the police, and everyone in Woodbrook, having an inflated ego and taunting Sam after framing her for his crimes, and arrogantly underestimating Sam's ability to retaliate. This inflated sense of superiority ultimately leads to his downfall. Sam outmaneuvers him in the final issue, murdering both Nigel and his mother, and framing him for the entire killing spree in Woodbrook. Another important note is Nigel's complete lack of remorse throughout this series. At no point does he exhibit guilt, self-reflection, or concern for the damage he causes. His desire to be seen and acknowledged by someone he deems as genuine, namely Sam, overshadows all moral and emotional reasoning. He never questions the morality of his actions, only their impact in terms of recognition. His emotional shallowness and moral indifference are definitive characteristics of sociopathy. While Nigel does not appear to have conduct disorder from an early age, a formal requirement for the ASPD diagnosis, there is an implied lifelong pattern of social detachment, emotional volatility, and alienation from peers that likely trace back to his adolescence. He has always struggled to fit in, finds others phony, and seems to retreat into a fantasy world fueled by voyeurism and violence. So these traits taken together, his reckless disregard for others, manipulation, impulsivity, aggression, emotional volatility, lack of remorse, and a desperate need for connection and validation, support a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder with highly sociopathic traits. Nigel is not merely a violent killer. He is a deeply disturbed individual whose psychological dysfunction defines his entire identity, ultimately leading him into a destructive and self-sabotaging confrontation with the only person he ever felt understood him, Sam herself. Now, in addition to ASPD, I also believe that Nigel suffers from NPD, or Narcissistic Personality Disorder. Nigel displays numerous characteristics consistent with Narcissistic Personality Disorder, which is defined in the DSM-5 as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy and behavior, need for admiration, and a lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. From the outset of this series, Nigel is portrayed as someone who believes himself to be fundamentally different and superior compared to others. He claims to see through what he perceives as the phony nature of those around him, especially during his college years, suggesting a deep-seated sense of alienation rooted not just in social awkwardness, but in self-aggrandizing beliefs about his own uniqueness and insight. This aligns with the DSM-5 criterion of having a grandiose sense of self-importance and believing oneself to be special or unique. Nigel also has a constant need for admiration, though it manifests in a covert and pathological fashion. His crimes are not committed solely for thrill or for sadism. They are performed for an audience, and more specifically for Sam. Nigel constructs elaborate, grotesque displays of his victims' bodies in public spaces, such as the elementary school lobby or the town parade, because these are not merely homicides. They are performance art meant to shock the community and, more importantly, capture Sam's attention. He does not seek validation from the general public, but from someone he views as equally special and authentic. His desire to be recognized by Sam as her equal or counterpart is obsessive, suggesting that admiration and acknowledgement are essential to maintaining his self-worth. Also, one of the clearest indications of NPD is Nigel's lack of empathy. He commits horrifying acts of violence, decapitations, disembowelments, body mutilations, without ever expressing any remorse or even internal conflict. His victims are not people to him. They are props in his narrative of self-expression and emotional gratification. Even his own mother, Lola, whom he initially seems to care for, is ultimately collateral damage in his escalating spiral downward. This emotional detachment and objectification of others is consistent with narcissistic pathology, especially the vulnerable subtype, in which emotional needs are masked by manipulation and passive-aggressive control. Nigel also exhibits fantasies of success, power, or ideal love. His belief that Sam will eventually recognize him as her equal is a fantasy rooted not in evidence, but in entitlement and delusion. He believes he can earn her validation by demonstrating his authenticity through his violence. When Sam rejects him, clearly, firmly, and with disgust, Nigel is not only hurt, but enraged. His narcissistic injury triggers a violent retaliatory plan. He frames Sam, digs up and displays the paint cans that house the body parts of her victims in Sam's own hardware store, and calls the police, all in an effort to destroy her for not reciprocating his admiration. This dramatic overreaction to criticism and rejection is a hallmark of NPD, especially in men who externalize their wounded ego through aggression and blame shifting. Nigel also demonstrates arrogance and haughty behaviors, especially in his taunts towards Sam. After framing her, he delights in the idea that he has beaten her, outsmarted the town's most cunning predator. His confidence is not grounded in realism, though, but in a fragile ego that inflates his intellectual and emotional abilities. Even in the final issue, when he's unknowingly walking into Sam's trap, he carries himself with smug certainty and even calls her dummy. His downfall comes not from external pressure, but from his overconfidence and inability to accept that someone else might be smarter than him, a tragic flaw common in narcissistic personalities. And lastly, Nigel's voyeuristic tendencies also indicate NPD. Photographing his victims, maintaining a darkroom, and collecting hidden photos may serve as a way for him to maintain control and idealize his targets from a distance. These obsessive habits reinforce the idea that he curates people into his world for the sole purpose of meeting his emotional needs. When Sam fails to meet those needs, she is no longer just a rejection. She becomes the enemy, the phony he once admired, and the object of his revenge. Ultimately, while Nigel Albright is undeniably a sociopath as defined in his ASPD diagnosis, the co-occurring presence of NPD adds a crucial layer of depth to his psychological profile. His obsession with admiration, his inflated self-worth, his inability to tolerate rejection, and his complete disregard for the humanity of others all point to a narcissistic core driving his actions. Rather than killing for pure pleasure or chaos, Nigel kills to be seen, to be admired, and to feel important. And when that admiration is denied, he lashes out with vindictive rage. This blend of narcissism and sociopathy makes him not only dangerous, but psychologically complex. and it explains why he spirals so violently out of control when Sam refuses to play the role he's written for her in his fantasy. So where does this leave us with Nigel Albright? When we piece everything together, his emotional detachment, lack of remorse, manipulation, grandiosity, obsessive surveillance, and deeply ritualistic behaviors, we're not just looking at a serial killer hidden in a sleepy woodland town. We're looking at someone who, through the lens of psychological analysis, fits not one, but multiple separate diagnostic profiles. What's most disturbing isn't that Nigel kills, but that he watches, that he waits, that he scripts his world like a director behind the camera, seeing people not as people, but as actors in a story he's already decided the ending for. Nigel Albright isn't just a villain, he's a case study. He's the darkness that hides behind politeness, the predator who wears the mask of community involvement. And while Sam may be the killer we follow in Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, Nigel is the killer who reminds us that evil can come in many forms, even in the form of an innocent and unimposing mouse. Alright guys, so what do you think about Nigel? Let me know in the comments below. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Comic Drops for more deep dives into your favorite comics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.